And we're here thanks to the great perseverance of the one and only Sam Reynolds. Welcome back, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
Uh,
glad
we,
to be here.
yeah, we were having trouble logging you on. Sam, you've been my friend for a long time, and one of the things I love about you is this great influence you have on me is you bring out the grown up in me. These frustrating technical situations that make me want to scream like a child and cry. But no, when I got to step up that game when I'm with you and just be a grown up about it and handle problems as they come up. So, thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you. But I always think of you, the girl, as the grown up in this relationship. I can be like, either the bully or kind of the.
If I'm the grown up in any relationship, the world is in trouble, my friend. But anyway, great to have you back. Of course, today's technical snafu has only been sort of the tip of the iceberg for one heck of a Mercury retrograde, I gotta say. Certainly in my sphere. Everything from, well, the faulty Wi-Fi issues that took 2 weeks and 2 visits by my provider to sort out, and dental issues, a cracked tooth, and all the just stuff coming apart, either me or the world around me. Um, but it is what it is. How have things been on your end, besides the fact that we've
We just had a
managed?
problem.
Yes.
Um, well, I'll get into that. But what do you think is a theme? Because there's definitely been a theme for me. What's been the theme for you in that sense? Cracked tooth, Wi-Fi issues. I don't know what else or anything else you care to share. What's it been
Um,
for you?
yeah, just things not working like they should is really like everything sort of undermined, this sort of the regime of my life, which is actually in a state that it needs daily management. So things going wrong and throwing me back a week or two are really sort of, more destructive than usual on my ability to you know function and execute my life as I'm trying to. So yeah, I just like it really really was a strong one. I think the other thing, I mean, the tooth is yeah, I remember sort of the last time I was at a dentist 2 years ago, they told me I had this little cavity, but it was too small to fix now. We'll have to wait to fix it. And then next thing I know, the tooth cracks. And so now it's got to be fixed. So I think that's kind of that. With the Wi-Fi, the thing about the Wi-Fi is we've been living in this townhouse for a year. I rented this place for my stepkids because they're going to school nearby here in Vancouver, and I'm here, so working to pay the bills so that they have a good place to stay in while they're at school. And um, unfortunately, when I signed the lease last, in late August of 2022, Mercury was retrograde, and I was like, okay, like I simply have to, we have to live somewhere. It has to be now. I can't like wait 3 weeks to sign the lease. Life was demanding that we have a place to stay. So I signed a lease knowing full well that Mercury was retrograde. And like, sure enough, I mean, the whole thing, the Wi-Fi issues are just sort of the latest thing. I mean, that old tenet about don't sign leases during Mercury retrograde is absolutely true. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to, and then you have all these problems on your shoulders that, had you had more control over timing, you could have avoided. But that just wasn't the case for us. So there we are.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, first, I'm sorry that you're
Oh,
going through all of that, but
yeah,
well, I do have a slight disagreement. I don't know if that tenant always has to be upheld. You actually gave me a story about Mercury retrograde related to contracts and the Beatles, right? In terms of
oh yeah,
they, they
yeah.
you probably can tell it better than I can tell it, but we'll get to that. I think ultimately it's scrutiny that's required. I always say be aware during Mercury retrograde rather than just beware. And yeah, like you said, sometimes there's nothing you can do. I mean, some people take that tenet as a prohibition. And am I very tinny? I don't know how I
Yeah,
sound.
you are. It's not. It's. I mean, I can hear you. It's not ruining the conversation.
Okay.
But I take it you're not using the fancy Shure mic that you usually.
I didn't want to take more time to get
Okay.
that and
All right.
sorry,
Uh,
but just to finish that point,
yeah, please do.
and then go on to what I was going to say about my experience of it. I mean, my theme of it has been violation, and experiencing the brinks of violation. I can hear an echo too. That's why I also asked that,
Oh, okay.
which is
I don't
weird.
hear an echo.
Okay. Um. So when I say violation, I've been in my place also renting for almost 2.5 years, pretty much without incident. And I do have cameras because I'm at the end of a cul-de-sac. And so it's right near what we call an arroyo, sorry, an arroyo, where we have some people who are unhoused who may, end up around there, or just people passing through.
Sure. Yeah.
So I caught a woman on camera while I was in Tucson a few weeks ago. I thought she was lost, but apparently she was a thief and had been canvassing and going along different places here. Now, she didn't get in my place, but the alarm went off that I don't even really have an alarm system, so it was the old tenant's alarms. Um, and I caught her on camera trying to get into my backyard. And then just some weird experiences and weird encounters with people on social media. One woman calling me a charlatan because I wouldn't answer her about her question on trauma. She was like, "Well, what are the astrological indicators of being a victim?"
Mm.
And I was like, "Anyone can be a victim, right?" You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be the Sun Neptune aspect or something like that. And so she called me a charlatan, and she spelled it really wrong. It
Uh-oh.
sounded like a Pokemon, but it was just it
Maybe
was
she
like
was just trying to call you a dishonest Pokemon. Maybe that was.
maybe she
Yeah.
was.
Maybe.
So it's just been that theme, some tech stuff, but not really a lot of tech stuff
Okay.
for me. That's why I'm surprised by this.
Well, okay. To go back to your point about the Beatles contract, just you would think that a rock group signing like the most sort of in let's go full language here. It's the one of the most sort of important record contracts of the age being signed during the Mercury retrograde. But yeah, over the course of their career, it started off as a really bad contract, and they wound up renegotiating it for a lot more, which is kind of a classic Mercury retrograde thing. And indeed, I mean, I didn't want to get into the weeds with my lease story here, but that is what happened here. When I signed the lease for this townhouse, the owner said, okay, they're, like it's sort of there's a bunch of townhouses and we're all in sort of like a complex, right? So, um, not like an apartment building, but sort of, a row of townhouses. And he said, well, they're going to have some work done on the exterior of the building. I know it requires some scaffolding, and it'll probably take a couple of months. And but I don't know much about it. It turned out to be this huge ordeal. The whole complex covered in scaffolding, drills and hammers and
Right.
saws every day. But as a result of that, I was able to negotiate not quite about like 33% of the rent down, you know. And so like that did, and look, astrology business is good, but I'm in Vancouver, one of the most expensive cities, trying to survive in an expensive neighborhood, not because I need to be in an expensive neighborhood, but because it's close enough to the school. Like any neighborhood that would be remotely affordable would be like, hours away from the university. So, it really helped to have the discount, but the downside was I had saws and jackhammers and all that stuff like right outside our window often.
and, and,
So yeah,
and that's, I think, a really important point to share. And thank you for sharing that, because I think I always tell people, people are always scared during Mercury retrogrades, or like, oh, it's going to mess up. I'm like, well, do you have something you need to renegotiate or to
mhm,
revisit,
sure,
review, revise? these are also very important things to do during a Mercury retrograde. Some people renegotiate, refinance their house or other
Oh yeah,
things.
no. Look, it's I think of Mercury retrogrades as being like, they're like sharks in the ocean. You can fear them if you want, but they're part of the ecosystem. They're there for a reason. you know it doesn't they can wreak havoc. Look, I agree with every point you're making, but I just know also as an astrologer that if I'm signing a lease while Mercury's retrograde, then I'm probably inviting a bunch of complications that I would
That's true.
probably rather not have. And that's where Mercury retrograde is the quote unquote enemy. If you're trying to get from point A to point B in a straight line, that is, Mercury retrograde is not the
It's not
time that
it.
you want to do that. And when you just want to like sort of sign a lease so you have an apartment so you can sort of like, I work from home, so I need, it's my home office. So it's my stepkids and their education and all that, all the reasons that one has a home if one can have one. We invited a bunch of complications. It's true, it did get us a discount and that helped in some fashion. Now the scaffolding's been gone for 2 months, so suddenly I have to make that much more money every month to pay this crazy rent. But there you go. It's yeah, I don't want to moan about it, but it is. I mean, I hear you. There is a time, and there are a lot of things that are very appropriate to do during Mercury retrograde, and there's no point being afraid of them. I mean, it's it's something that happens 3 times a year. You might as well be afraid of the rain or nighttime or something. You know what I mean? Like, well, I guess you don't get that much rain in New Mexico, but anyway, do you? I don't think so.
It depends on the year.
Maybe
And
okay, yeah, maybe these
time of
days.
year.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
time of year.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
in any case, you know what I mean. Just some things are just sort of part of nature. There's no, you can avoid them.
yeah, and I just wanted to bring that home, not so much to say, "Oh, Mercury retrograde," not to play down Mercury retrograde, as much as not. I think it's been played up too much. I think
Sure.
a lot of people spend a lot of time in fear, and I think, yeah, I think you put it beautifully. I mean, I think if you're talking about going some way in some straight line, it's not going to happen with a Mercury retrograde. But that also doesn't have to be completely prohibitive. The person I first started studying astrology with wasn't an astrologer. Um, she had the same birthday as I did, and she had some astrology books, and she was really into astrology. Now later, she came to renounce astrology, became a born
Hmm.
again Christian, but she was very. This didn't help my skepticism. She was very like literal. Like, so when Mercury went retrograde, she's like, "No, I don't travel. I try to avoid, doing new things. I start my papers early because we were in grad school." And I was
Mhm.
like, "Girl, that's way too much." So yeah, that was my introduction to Mercury retrograde.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, travel. It would depend on what travel. I think there are some trips I would try to avoid if they were Mercury retrograde trips. Um, no, but not just anything. Um, term papers. It's always a good idea to write your term papers early. When is that not a
Wait,
good idea?
wait, did you? Did you? I didn't. I certainly didn't.
No, not
Did
never,
you?
not once. I'm not sure I ever turned one in on time. I'm just saying it's a good idea. I never said like I am the living human embodiment of the execution of good ideas. That
I
is not
know.
is not my claim
You're
to
you're
fame, sir.
you're right. You're right. But yeah, man, no, that was never me. I did it like right the day before, or 2 days before.
Oh,
I
no, I
might,
was
I might, I might have started the research before that, but you know,
yeah, no, I was I had a really imbalanced sort of, education or approach to education or reception of my education. I was just one of those people. I excelled in some classes and just like was hopeless at others, and it had everything to do with my interest in the subject. I literally had perfect grades in history and English literature, and just like abysmal grades in math and economics and things like that. It was just, yeah, it was sad. And as with most grown-ups, if I had it all over to do again, I would maybe try harder in some ways. But yeah, no, I was a hopeless case, absolute hopeless case.
it's okay.
All right.
Anyway,
Yeah. So we've been, gosh, how long have we been gone? 2, 3 weeks since we last spoke,
At
right?
least, yeah, at
Yeah.
least that long.
So long that I've lost track, and yeah, I haven't wanted to. Well, last week this time was when my Wi-Fi was getting fixed for the second time, which is why I didn't do it last week. And then the time before that, we had to postpone. And I think that it, but we had also skipped a week before that, so I think it has been like 3 weeks since you've been on. And I vaguely remember where we left off. Do you remember where we left off in your slideshow?
I really don't. I do think, and maybe these guys remember. So I'm going to share my screen. Um, I vaguely remember. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to do the entire screen. Okay, it's surreal, doesn't it? Um, can you see my screen? Yeah. Now
Yep.
it's just you start to see everything. Wow. Okay. Now I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I did. We talk about Black August.
Nope.
Okay. Oh, I didn't mean to start from the beginning, but here we go.
Yeah, we went through this. Yeah.
Yep, I
I
do. I
definitely I
remember all
definitely
of it.
remember the Olmec heads. Oh, yeah, I remember that picture of me from India. Yeah, I
Yep.
think Black August looks like about right.
Yeah, I think that's where we started. Um, it's September, so this wouldn't have the poignancy as we were doing it last month. Um, but this was just when I talk about destiny, astrological destiny of African Americans.
Yeah.
One thing I've long noticed is the significance of August, and other people have as well. Like Dream Hampton did a film on Black August, and capture some of these particular events. Some of them aren't listed here. Um, and it's just been interesting to note, as everyone can see here, many of the significant events in African American history that have happened. And the natural question is like, but why? That's the question I would ask.
Mhm.
How did this happen? And okay. So I have a couple different theories. One theory is that sometime between July and and it depends on what century, we have the dog star rising
Mhm.
between July into August. And the dog star is known as Sirius, or also known as Sutpet in Egypt. Now, what is interesting about this star is not only was there one African civilization that honored it, which were the Egyptians, which seems to be the bedrock of, we could say, even what people think is the Thema Mundi. So there's two theories for why we have the Thema Mundi started with Cancer.
Mhm.
So one is maybe related to the annual heliacal rise of the dog
Of
star of
Cirrus, yeah,
Sirius,
sure.
and the other one might be just because in the northern hemisphere, where astrology did develop as we know it, right? I'm going to make that qualification
Mhm.
because many cultures around the world
Of
had their
course.
own astrology.
Mhm.
Um, as we know it, the sun reaches its apex going toward the Tropic of Cancer. And so that may have been now what we call the Tropic of Cancer, but it may have been acknowledging that this is what happens in the northern hemisphere as related to the sun. But I think the Sirius rising, heliacal rising, has a lot of merit. Now, I want to say something around this because the big buzz in the last few years has been the Lion's Gate. And some have tied the Lion's Gate portal to this and, relating to this. Now, I invite anyone to kind of do their own research on it. But the Lion's Gate comes from one particular astrologer, and I believe from the 90s, who noticed that on 8/8, there was going to be an eclipse in Leo. And it also seemed synchronous with roughly the time of the heliacal rising of Sirius. I don't believe this astrologer intended this to be an event in perpetuity.
Was this the eclipse of 1999, the great
Yes,
fixed
yes.
cross? Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Which was incidentally within a couple of days of the first time we heard the name Vladimir Putin in the news. He was named prime minister and then later succeeded as president, and that like out of nowhere. But that's the association. So yes, in August of 1999 there was a total solar eclipse, um, with the sun and moon in Leo, obviously, but you had Mars in Scorpio opposite Saturn in Taurus, all square Uranus in Aquarius, which was opposing the eclipse. This very malefic looking grand fixed cross.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was very striking at the time. And I remember I was in New York, but I knew astrologers in New York who were going to Plymouth, England to actually witness the thing. And I was sort of very envious because, I didn't have the funds to fly to England to see it. But this was also, I was in the middle of the whole, I had just started going to Project Hindsight that summer. And so I was also, I was uh, going for the third weekend every month that summer to Cumberland, Maryland for the Einstein intensives. But is that so? Who was the astrologer who proposed that
I
eclipse
don't
as well?
remember him right now, but it wasn't
Okay,
anyone I think that we readily know.
right.
Um, but yes, so this is where this has become the thing. Now, um, being incendiary as I can be sometimes, went on my Instagram and Facebook and said, the Lionsgate portal is bullshit.
Oh yes,
Um,
yes,
I, it was mainly to be somewhat provocative and annoyed, right? Because someone did ask, if we were going to talk, if you and I were going to talk about the Lionsgate portal.
right.
Um, but I would, after it sparked a lot of good conversations, including some things from Moses Sirigar, some other things from other astrologers. It's not like it changed my mind completely. It didn't. But it softened me to think like, no, maybe not BS, but it's tapped into something that does relate to the heliacal rising. But true to form with astrology, and I'm just saying this because people have asked about it. The heliacal rising for Sirius really depends on your latitude and where
Yeah,
you are. So it
yeah.
happens throughout the, the month of August. Now, if we're talking about Egypt, it's going to happen at a certain particular time, probably roughly around early August. But it changes over time. But one thing that's significant is that there's another African culture that also honored the um, the dog star Sirius, and these are the Dogon people of Burkina Faso in West
Hmm.
Africa. And what's fascinating about their work, as it's been recorded, is a couple things. One, astronomers now recognize Sirius as a binary star system. It looks like one star to us, but once you look at it, it's actually supposedly two stars, in orbit, not necessarily around each other, but in orbit,
Yeah,
right?
and therefore there's a flicker and a
Okay.
variation in brightness.
Hmm. The Dogon people, though, say there are three stars.
Hmm.
It's not binary. And so there's Sirius A, there's Sirius B, as astronomers, Western astronomers talk about it, but there's Sirius C. And what's interesting about that star is that they assign Sirius C to women. So they say that's a star for women. Now, I don't know if there are any particular rituals or things that they do related to Sirius C, but they also do rituals related to Sirius A, B, and C,
Hmm.
as a point of connection. So, and what's also interesting about the Dogon people is that they also see themselves as perhaps having come from Egypt. Now, whether that can be verified archaeologically or anthropologically, I don't know. Um, but this is what the Dogon say.
Hmm.
Now, Sirius is also seen as marking immense creative talents in any field. This is actually from the Astrology King, not to be confused with the Leo King. Um,
Okay, that I thought you were. I was like, really? You're quoting that guy?
No,
Oh, I remember Astrology King. He's a guy in Australia. What's his name?
he
I know.
is,
I'm trying to remember his name.
and I'm blanking on his name. It
Oh, I
just
know
came
who
to
you
me.
mean. Yeah.
Partridge. His last
That's
name
right.
is Jamie Partridge.
Jamie Partridge. Right. Yeah. Okay, I remember.
So
I really, this is what the kind of Leo I am. I saw Astrology King, and I was just thinking Leo King, and I'm like, oh, okay, Sam's quoting him. Interesting. All right, let's see where this goes. All right.
mm-mm.
Um.
and I mean, I have my issues with the Leo King.
Oh,
I do.
really? You don't say, Sam.
But I still consider him a friend. I mean, David
Yeah.
and we still talk about, we talk on Twitter, not as much as we used to. I mean, there's some things that he's gone on more about. But no, I'm quoting Jamie. And so let me just finish that quote. In any field at all, with only the warning that there may be, that here may be more inner power than can safely managed. We have here the star of the truly great figures in every field of human endeavor.
Hmm.
I thought that was really powerful, considering that black people, um, both in Egypt, or people of color in Egypt, and then also in the Dogon in Burkina Faso, have that. And if we go back to this chart that I talk about as the first Africans chart, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple things that become significant, like the South Node here would be pretty close to Sirius in Cancer. And that is also interesting because one of the things I always talk about, as about the power of this nation, and when I say this nation, I am talking about the United States. Its its sun is right on Sirius. Um, in using the July 4th chart, 1776. And I don't think that's a happy accident, or I don't think that's an accident. It could
Right.
be happy. I don't think that's just a coinkydink. I think
Gotcha.
there's something there. And so with the South Node for the first Africans chart, which again, I mean, I think that's largely going to be true whether we're talking about late August, the 21st or the 25th or whenever, it's still going to be roughly around 13 degrees of Cancer for the South Node.
Mm.
And so there's still something here, and a lot of people think, just to correct something in case people are thinking, a lot of people think North Node good, South Node bad, and they really shouldn't. I give my students a different analogy. I say the North Node is probably more like your underdeveloped hand, and your South Node is more like your developed hand.
Oh, really? Oh, that's an
Yeah.
interesting thing. That's very different from what I say.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I want to hear you out. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay, but I want to hear you out now. I mean, so when I say it's your developed hand, like I don't remember or know when I became right-handed. It's some time in my past, and this is kind of some
Sure.
aspect of myself that I just use. I mean, I'm right-handed, but that doesn't mean I should neglect my left hand.
No.
And it means that I may actually have to do some extra work on my left hand. So I just got this scan today, a full body scan, which means I have a lot of work to do. Speaking about Mercury retrograde, I got a lot to work on my body. But one thing that was interesting is
I
that
get one of those every time I go to the airport.
He's going to be here all week,
I'm
ladies
so
and
sorry.
gentlemen.
I'm so sorry. Please continue.
No,
Sir.
it's okay.
I'm a bad host.
It was funny. But what was interesting is that my muscle mass on my left is a little more developed than my muscle mass on my right.
Mm.
And I guess what that brings home is that I've been doing a good job with my North Node in that sense. But before I go on to the next slide or set of slides, how do you look at the nodes?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of surprised that you go with the South Node being the developed. I think of the North Node being very conscious and sort of like proactive, whereas the South Node being unconscious and reactive. The analogy I use often, it's kind of gruesome, but we are talking about the lunar nodes. I say when it comes to committing murder, the North Node will commit a premeditated murder for personal gain, whereas the South Node will just, snap and grab a weapon and come at the first person who's close by, just, for no reason whatsoever.
I don't think there's a contradiction. I mean,
Okay.
if something's falling, guess what I'm going to reach for with which hand? It's going to be my right hand.
Yeah.
It's going to be like this
Sure.
hand.
The instinctive hand. I get you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I get you. I get you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, whereas I have to do a lot more.
To develop the
Go on.
left hand, you have to make this conscious effort. Yeah. Okay. I do see how your analogy connects to
Parallels
how I
yours.
see it. Yeah. I guess I think of the South Node being kind of, almost like lizard brained. It's not really sort of thinking about its actions, but I get that. That is kind of the right hand. I mean, just instinctively, I pick things up with
Well,
the right
right
hand.
hand for us.
For us,
right?
for those
Right.
who are inclined to be right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get it. Some of us are wired differently and we're left-handed, and it makes us look cooler when we're playing guitar if we're left-handed,
Right.
Yeah. I think
Um,
I'm always like, when I see left-handed people playing guitar or bass, I'm just like, oh, so lucky.
Well, I'm also, a boxing fan, right? And my father did something.
Right.
My father did something. He was a fight trainer and he trained me into boxing. He taught me how to fight ambidextrously, which and most other things I can't do. So I
Right.
could be in the middle of a fight and switch to a southpaw.
Mm-hmm.
So a southpaw is, I mean, for those who don't follow boxing, can be deadly because you're used to guarding one particular side of your face and your body,
Right.
right? And and most people, not all people, but most people are right-handed. So you're used to someone jabbing more so with their left and then trying to come in for the power with the right. It's the reverse
Yeah.
for a southpaw.
Yeah.
And so so you can get surprised and knocked out. So they're
Sure.
very dangerous fighters to fight if you're
Right.
not,
Ditto,
aware.
ditto also in the music world, playing drums. Unlike guitar, drums are an instrument where you can work towards a kind of parity between the two sides. Really well-trained drummers will play, even if they're right-handed, they'll play, the ride cymbal or the hi-hat with the left hand and use the right for the snare. But most drummers, including myself, just instinctively cross our arms and play the ride or hi-hat like this and the snare with this, which limits you. This is way more drummers do this, but the ones who train themselves to do this are like, off in the stratosphere. They can do all kinds of things that the drummers who have to unlearn this can do.
I never paid attention. So what's Phil Collins? Is he a lefty or a righty?
No, he's a lefty. Yeah, he's a lefty, and he arranges his kit left. There are some left-handed drummers who still arrange their kit right, but he does have his like smaller toms to his right and his larger toms to his left, which is like, for instance, the exact reverse that I would do as a right-handed drummer. I would have my smaller tom here and my floor tom to my right. So yeah, he'll, like if he's playing in the air tonight, he's going do 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 do. Whereas if I was playing in the air tonight, I would go do 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 do.
I wish I could see. I can't see you right now, just so you know. I mean, unfortunately.
Oh, you can't see me at all? You don't see my Oh, I can see you in a little square in the bottom corner.
Okay, it's because I'm sharing the whole screen.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and that's kind of the thing. And so, if anyone is replying or saying things to me, feel free to repeat them or read them to me because I can't see what they're saying.
Okay. Well, the one interesting, to bring us back to Sirius, Behaven said Bernadette Brady describes Sirius as the scorcher, the quest for immortality. The individual may be sacrificed for the greater expression, often found of charts of activists or ... And I guess they're going to finish that thought. We're looking at Frederick Douglass here. They're finishing the thought now. Or people who work on projects that have great community significance. She notes Armstrong's quote, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," as, okay. That's the problem.
Yeah.
When people want to type a lot of text in the chat, it kind of, it's good for sort of quick messages, but then when it becomes a long note, then it kind of slows us down. Anyway, I'll come back and finish that thought. We're looking at Frederick Douglass. I did. We've talked about Frederick Douglass in the past. It's interesting. You've got February 21st there. Now,
this is a rectified chart from.
Okay, this is a
Amir
rectified
Bey.
chart because from Amir Bey. Okay, because now last time you and I talked about Frederick Douglass was literally over 10 years ago. we probably talked about him. I'm going to guess the year 2008 or 2009 or something like that.
Where were we talking about him? I don't remember.
Online.
Okay.
But I mean, since then I've read a couple of biographies, and I have his own autobiographies. He wrote 3 in his lifetime. And it seems that towards the end of his life, he did find a document that did confirm he was born in February 1818. And I can't recall, I can pull up the book if you like, but as I recall, it might even we definitely know what month he's born. And I think he used the 14th arbitrarily.
He did.
As like this is my symbolic birthday. But what I didn't realize when you and I talked about him, however many years ago, 12, 15 years ago, that I know now, is that the month is confirmed. Like he was definitely, in my Venus interval system, he was a blue 4, no matter what, whether Amir's rectification is accurate or not, whether the 14th was his actual birthday or not, whatever the case, he's in that part of the Venus cycle. But okay, this is interesting. So this is the rectification that Amir did of his chart.
Yeah, and there is, obviously I grew up because my father's birthday was February 14th. So
Okay.
I've always been aware of Frederick Douglass as, 214. And I'm using Amir's because I think it does have some measure of resonance. Although, when I listen to, or when I used to do his "What to the American Slave is Your 4th of July" speech, his 4th of July speech, I mean, I hear the Aquarian in a lot of ways, but that that could be his Mercury, that could be his Venus, because I've become convinced, and people might ask like, well, why are you talking about this chart? Well, I'm going to be looking at charts of notable African Americans, just as an illustration related to this this destiny, and this by no thought, complete. So I don't want anyone to think like these are the only African Americans who matter. This is not true.
No,
that's not it at all.
That's kind of intense.
I know, right? But no, I think one of the things that's interesting with him, well, I was just going to say about Aquarians, I don't know a sign. I mean, people talk about Aquarians as the humanitarians of the zodiac and all that. I'm not convinced of that. I mean, there's a joke that Robert Corey, and Robert Corey, he says, and he just applies an old joke to Aquarians. He says, it's I love humanity. It's people I can't stand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think there's some way in which when an Aquarian invades, because there is, and the Indians talk about Aquarius as a very idealistic sign, and I think there's some truth in that.
Oh yeah.
And when you cross or fail in their idealism, I mean, I don't know any sign that can get as angry about it. And he has his Mercury at the south bending here. If this is accurate, and again, I want people to realize this is a rectified chart based on a colleague of ours. It sounds like Amir Bey too. Amir Bey is a New York-based astrologer, an artist, a Black astrologer, whose work I greatly respect. And I guess it does capture a lot of the things that are true for this particular chart. Now, as it relates to the destiny of African Americans, among the things that really stands out for me is, again, being at 11 degrees Taurus, that Taurus-Scorpio axis that I pointed out. I've mentioned before on this, I was about to say on your show, but it is your show, on your podcast and your broadcast, I've mentioned before that another astrologer and I, Gina Piccolo, we did an article for the Mountain Astrologer where we talked about the significance of Scorpio and Taurus and how we found, even randomly, that coming up pretty consistently. This dynamic between Venus and Scorpio, Venus and Mars. And I think that does have something to relate to the destiny of African Americans. Now, we don't have a birth date written in stone for, this is Booker T. Washington.
Right. I think we know he's born in 1856, and I think that that's as much as we know, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Now, there is some conjecture that he was born in April. and it's a date given. And I've just been working with this date, and there is something about him that seems very Martian to me, and maybe even as we might describe as Moon Mars. And you're like, and this, you, I'm not going to be flattering to every figure here. Now, there's a lot about Booker T. Washington that I really admire. Um, I think we talked on another
Sure.
episode. I'll say
Sure. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
we
I
talked
talked
on
about the
another
Atlanta Compromise when I was doing
right,
my
and
show.
and
Yeah.
I actually think what becomes important in reading that the Atlanta Compromise and his speech from that is that Booker T was of the mindset that African Americans should secure economic power first before concentrating on civil rights power, which was the argument from W.E.B. Du Bois. But one of the things, if you look at his, Up from Slavery book, and I've read this book now at least twice, is that he was kind of a workaholic. And I'm laughing because he also made his wives be a workaholic. Like it just kind of, because I think he was married at least twice, but I want to say three times. But it seems like with each wife, it was about like almost like she worked till she died. I don't mean like in a field, like in
Sure.
more like related to Tuskegee and everything else with it. Um, and so this gives me the impression of the Sun, Moon, Mars opposition.
Hmm.
Um, the Venus, Neptune, some measure the idealism
Hmm.
again in a different way, but more, you know, um, the dreamer. He also was a hard worker. He had set, Venus, Neptune square to Saturn in that
Yeah.
dynamic. Pluto and Taurus, which again harks back to some measure of Pluto and Taurus from the 1619 chart. Um, so I mean, it's kind of like this dynamic between. I think it's Scorpio rising.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, what were we gonna say?
Oh, nothing. I just when I think of him, though, I think of. I mean, in some sense, you can look at a lot of African American leaders from this time and say that they died sort of disillusioned or somewhat, broken or cut off from their legacy in some ways. But he always strikes me as a particularly kind of tragic figure in the end. Like towards the end, there seems to be a lot of disillusionment. In terms of his view of his project, I'm not even sure. Yeah, I'm not sure that he died confident that he had made all the sort of the right moves or what have you. That's the sense I get towards the end, is that a lot of things are coming apart, and that he's sort of questioning even himself.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think he was also loaded with a lot of different scandals.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so some of may have been of his own making. Kind of dipping out on his marriage or believed to be, and then some other parts of it is just the dogged interpretations that he suffered with W.E.B. Du Bois. And I mean, we have to remember at that time too. I mean, W.E.B. Du Bois is, I would guess, almost my age or about my age at that time in the early 20th century, and he still was much of a firebrand, and he had been a firebrand. So he looked at Booker T as kind of a relic.
yeah,
Um, so I bet that dogged him. Speaking of Booker T, I bet that dogged him and made him wonder about things, because Tuskegee is still going. Tuskegee is still a
yeah,
school
yeah.
in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Um, People are still going there. We have the Tuskegee Airmen to thank
Hmm.
for their contribution during World War II.
Yeah.
Um, so I think,
I often think of how two young graduates of Tuskegee made their way to the border of South Carolina and North Carolina to start a small little shack school for African American kids, using the training that they had had. And they started this little school, and this little school is the whole reason that a kid named John Burks Gillespie, who we would know as Dizzy Gillespie, a kid so poor that on the holidays his family had to hide because they didn't have shoes, let alone proper clothes. Um, and that, you know, the training that he got to eventually become one of the most formidable, you know, musical creators of the 20th century. That's another one of the. It's a smaller personal story in terms of the, you know, it's not the airmen and that, but it's like what a huge contribution
Yeah.
to take someone, you know, to have that kind of influence. And of course, he's just one example. He's, you know, he's extraordinary enough that no one can really sort of ignore it, you know. But yeah,
And
anyway, I'm
is
sorry,
that
continue.
no? What's the school? Fisk?
No, it's a tiny, you know, he was from, what's the name of his town? It's right at the border of like South Carolina and North Carolina.
Okay.
I have the story here in my file on him. I could tell you I used to know these details, you know, I carry them for a long time, then they slip through them. Cheraw, South Carolina was the name of the
Okay.
town. You know, we're talking like, you know, yeah, like absolute rural
Well,
poverty.
I mean,
Nothing of any kind of. This was an offshoot. This was something that graduates from these two very young, as I recall, they're like two young people in their 20s who've just graduated from Tuskegee back around the turn of the century, and they start this school. And Gillespie's born in 1917, but the fact that this little school was started is like instrumental in everything that he could become.
and I mean, it's significant too that a lot of people came from, you know, historically black colleges like that to do just that kind of work.
Yeah,
And you know, a lot of people question like, well, what do we need HBCUs for? I mean, because historically they have represented, you know, bastions of education where African Americans didn't have access, and we're responsible for
yeah,
educating a great number of, you know, African Americans through the 20th century up until like, you know, even still the 21st century,
sure.
including our vice president.
Yeah, and you know, think your vice president actually once went to school in the same building I did in Montreal. There was a year of my life that Kamala Harris and I were in school in the same building. She was about 2
Oh
years older than
wow.
me. I've got pictures of her with friends of like people I still know who were 2 grades ahead of me.
Oh
But that's all.
wow.
But you know, that's of course that's not the sum total of her schooling.
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm even thinking, you know, outside the United States, you know, going back to South Africa, there's a Jesuit school called Fort Hare, which was really the only place that an African could get, you know, an advanced education, and it boasts graduates like Nelson Mandela, everyone, you know, the first president of Mozambique, the first president of Zambia, the first president of Namibia, you know, that whole region, every educated African virtually went to Fort Hare, and it's and like that one school, and think of how many different people that uplifted and gave them control over their destiny that they otherwise wouldn't have had. And there would have been no schooling if it wasn't for this one Jesuit school. It's astonishing how many people went there.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean the kind of difference just like one of these institutions can make is
That's
enormous.
profound.
Yeah.
And here's something interesting too. We'll get into in terms of the contrast. But I need to do a time check because I don't have
Oh
my
yeah,
watch.
yeah.
What
Well,
time do you have?
I'm at 11 Pacific time, so you know this would
Okay,
be 1 hour. This would
noon.
be one
Okay.
hour into our usual
No,
chat. So
I have 50 minutes. Okay. So this
okay, so
would be
you gotta leave 50 minutes from now.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah. If
I'll
it's
keep
noon
my eye on it.
time, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and
Um
we're fluid here. I you know the whole idea of this live stream is like it gives me the chance to chat with you, and people can just watch us talk. So it's not, you know, we don't have to like rush into completing anything. We can go down as many little
yeah,
blind
we're
alleys
almost
and go.
finished.
Okay,
Yeah, we're
well,
finished. Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah,
matter
but I mean,
whether we are or not. But anyway, yeah, by all means.
okay, great. So this is not even a rectified chart. This well, it's kind of a speculative chart for W.E.B. Du Bois. Um, there's some interesting parallels that he has to his, you know, I'm not going to call him nemesis, but maybe at times they felt like each other's nemesis. Um, you know, they both had the Venus Neptune conjunction. Um, you know, so Du Bois, at least we know, had a Sun Moon square. One of the things I will be talking about for NCGR, I'm going to be doing something for NCGR New York on Friday, whatever day that is, the last Friday of September.
Okay.
Um, And I'm going to be talking. I will be part of a panel um, with
The
John
20
Marcusella.
the
Yeah,
29th.
the 29th. Stephanie. I'm blinking on Stephanie's last.
Azaria?
No, not Azaria.
Okay.
Um, uh, she goes by she changed her name, Lady Kazemi, on
Oh,
social media.
okay.
Lady
I
Kazemi, yeah, you may not know her, but
I don't think I do. Okay.
she was in New York. But I'm going to be doing with her. And one of the things we're going to be talking about, like the outer planets and upcoming astrology, and I'm going to be talking about Neptune and Aries,
Mm.
and this Neptune and Aries, because he didn't have it, he had still in
No, but it's funny.
Pisces.
I was just remarking. It's funny that they would both have Venus Neptune conjunctions
Hmm.
in this scenario.
It is funny. I mean,
Yeah.
if we go with the idea that we definitely can talk about disillusionment that that he experienced,
Yeah.
but also in terms of we know a definitive disillusionment that W.E.B. Du Bois experienced, and this
Yeah.
could, and this could be
Yeah.
even the Sun, Moon, Saturn square,
Yeah. And the fact that
Mercury, Jupiter.
when he died, there was a triple Sun Venus Uranus conjunction opposite that Pisces Sun, right? I mean, like as I recall, at 4 degrees, like directly opposite that Sun.
Right, and it was on his North Node.
Mhm.
His Sun is conjoined to his South Node. You know, there's a lot that he was committed to making happen. I think there's some many great things that he committed to developing that came to fruition. Um, including having his long life. Now,
Mm.
as you read, one thing that struck me when I was a young man, I don't know why it stayed with me other than like the history parts of it, is that W.E.B. Du Bois committed to being like having a long life in his 20s, and he had an ironclad regimen. Like he was in bed, I believe, by 10 o'clock every night.
Mm.
Like and it was almost inviolable. I mean, maybe he broke it a few times that we don't know about, but like if he had an event, he was out and had left the event to be able to get back in bed or get in bed at 10 o'clock. It was amazing.
Mm.
Um, and then also in terms of his diet. So, I mean, we see some measure of the sun moon square. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, of course. Then this is why he was such a disciplined person
Mm.
in terms of getting things done and very orderly. He was a copious researcher and writer. Mercury Jupiter conjunction. And by the way, a lot of people get a lot of flack for that Mercury in Pisces. Well, Frank, our colleague Frank Piatowski did a
Oh,
research paper.
the late
With,
Frank Petrosky. Yeah.
yeah, the late great Frank Piatowski. Um, he did a paper on trying to identify markers in highly intelligent astrologers and people, and he found consistently one indicator was a Mercury in Pisces. Now, was it completely research and empirical? I'm not evaluating that, but it did get me thinking. And I have observed many people with Mercury and Pisces enough to kind of go like, this is not the mental deficit that people want to make it out to
No,
be.
Einstein had Mercury in Pisces.
No, he didn't. He had Mercury in Aries. He
No.
check it.
Oh, did he? Oh, it was just his son was. Oh, you're right.
Mhm.
You're right. He did have Mercury in Aries. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that the thing about with Mercury in Pisces is that it's in a sign of Jupiter, and so sometimes I often say is that they can know and access and understand things, but they can't always show their work. So it becomes like a life of figuring out how do they know what they know.
Mm.
Now, whether you want to talk about that from spiritual past lives, I mean, I leave that to anyone else's imagination or belief system. But what I've come to believe about it, even more concretely, if we were to talk about it just in the practical sense, is that they actually like Kelly Surtees has a Mercury in Pisces, right? So
Sure.
you know, it's a way in which they can think and reason a particular way and dive into things like bob and weave like you go into the as you do in the ocean.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's the struggle of learning how to deal with that fluidity in one's life. I do think Casey, um, what's his name? The sleeping prophet.
Yeah. I know who you mean. Edgar Casey.
Edgar Casey, I believe, had a Mercury in Pisces and
Mm.
was a son of Pisces. So there's a way in which, like, and it's reported that he could put his hand on books and read them. I don't,
Yeah.
I'm always skeptical. But
It's impressive enough that if you can make people believe you can do that, that's impressive in its own right. I
although my favorite thing, by the way, so I'm reading this book. I haven't read your book yet, but it's funny as Duncan. My favorite thing. This is just
Wait,
a
which book is that? I can't see.
Can you see it? No,
It's giving me the reverse. It
Oh,
looks like
David Ewing, David Ewan Duncan's book on calendar. I
Oh,
mentioned it to you.
oh yeah. Okay, yeah.
So my favorite thing with people like that or things like that is saying, like, I can speed read, and haven't gone through the whole book. But yeah, no, that's not what we're talking about. Anyway, we'll stop being silly.
Okay.
Now here's
If you
someone else. Here's Marcus Mosiah Garvey.
Yeah. And he's born, incidentally, not to interrupt, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
He is what I call a red 5. He's got Venus in Libra. He's a Leo with Venus in Libra, but that Venus is about to go retrograde. And he was born in that same red 5 Venus retrograde that I identify with the Haitian Rebellion of 1791, the Nat Turner Uprising of 1831, the Amistad Uprising of 1839, the New York Draft Riots of 1863, so on and so forth. The Red Summer of 1919, the long hot summer of 1967. So those in that same sort of repeating Venus cycle. Garvey he's born in the middle of all that, which is something that I find interesting.
Yeah, and I mean his chart, Venus Uranus, he doesn't have the Venus Neptune, but he has the Venus Uranus conjunction. He does have the Mercury square to Neptune and to Pluto. So both he knew how to weave a tale, but research and think deeply about what he was doing. And Garvey's influence, and I'm a little biased, and I never became, in the strict sense, a Garveyite. But when I lived in Bed-Stuy, I lived for 11 years on Marcus Garvey Boulevard. So his legacy and impact in the Black community cannot be underestimated, which is why I've included him here.
Well, he's got a global reach too. I mean, unlike the other people we've been talking about, he wasn't like American, like not from the USA. He was Jamaican. He's actually from the same little hamlet that Bob Marley would be born in years later. And his movement is really important to, say, the Rastafarian movement. You would not have Marcus Garvey without the Rastafarian movement. And having lived in Africa now, I really can fathom, like being in Montreal, I knew Rastafarians because, Canada being part of the Commonwealth, like the Caribbean, we get a lot of Jamaicans who emigrate to Canada. But I always thought of it as like this Caribbean phenomenon. But then I moved to South Africa and I realized, oh, no, this is like this global Pan-African. I met Rastafarians in Zanzibar. I met Rastafarians, which is a Muslim country, so there's that further disconnect of it not being Christian, and certainly a lot in South Africa. And so I think there's something really international about his reach.
I mean, he was actually international and actually wanted to go back to Africa. For African Americans. Now, you might have to correct my history here, but I actually think it's the reverse. I think there wouldn't be any way we would understand Rastafarianism without Garvey.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, no, you said the reverse.
No, that's not what I meant. I mean, obviously it's chronological. Okay. He came before Rastafarianism, so that wouldn't make any sense.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to check.
Sorry, if I spoke backwards. Yeah, that's
okay.
That would that's just chronologically.
Yeah, I think his influence in paving the way for Rastafarianism which also has more of its roots in Jamaica, but also its ties to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And also, and I mean, the Germans have a great word. They have a great word for a lot of things. What a
Zeitgeist.
reason. Yes, one of the reasons why I'm studying German, Zeitgeist, really the spirit of the times. Because it also
Time ghost. The time ghost is the literal translation,
time,
and
of course,
you
yeah,
kind of get what that phrase means. Yeah.
yeah, and I think he was tapped into something that became. I mean, even Du Bois was tapped into it, which is interesting in terms of Du Bois being a nemesis to Garvey and
Yeah. Booker T.
to Booker T. Washington,
Yeah.
you know, uh, where there's so much room for alignment, um, because it's almost like Garvey anticipated what would happen for Du Bois and his own movement to Africa. So here we have, like I said, it's Mercury, Pluto, and again, we have a strong Venus, that dimension of what I was talking about with the destiny of African Americans. Um, I'm not. This chart isn't also rectified. It's just a sunrise chart,
Hmm.
so no one should take its angles seriously or too seriously.
Yeah,
Um,
I try to remove the angles if I'm showing an untimed chart,
oh, that's
because then people start going, oh, so he's a Leo rising, and then
that's
sorry,
smart.
astrologers are incorrigible. Like if you put those points in front of them, they'll go ahead and interpret them whether they are meant to be there or not. So
You're
you may as
right.
well.
You're right.
I I feel I always have to be one step ahead of that.
That's a good tip. Thank you.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, he has this T square also. I mean, I forgot the Jupiter here as well. I think his major issue was overselling things. So you and I have talked a lot about this chart and about this man,
Hmm.
because I think it was in early discussions on horoscopic astrology on MySpace,
Hmm.
where there was a roiling debate on whether he was born 10:25 p.m. with a Capricorn
Or AM,
rising
right, right,
or
right.
a.m.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and he
yeah,
was Leo, and whether he was a Leo. And I remember you weighing in, and we would,
yeah,
go
yeah, yeah.
over. I think
Again, this is
Capricorn.
over a decade ago. This is so long
Right.
ago.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
almost
the-
20 years ago.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
might have even been before the Obama presidency, or at
Oh, it
best
was.
the Obama first
Oh, it
term.
was. Oh, it was.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
definitively.
yeah, yeah. This
I
is
mean,
this is W's president, and the Iraq war is still going on, and we're talking about whether Malcolm X is AM or PM. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think we've landed more on the fact that he's PM. I actually think I've used his chart. And by the way, for all the women present, I am keenly aware that I have mainly talked about men so far.
Mhm.
Um, so I do want to acknowledge that. And you're like, well, why are you talking about it? Well, I do have at
Well,
least one woman. Go on.
yeah, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. The part of it, some of that is an accident because, of course, if you're talking about Frederick Douglass, you know, you could talk about Sojourner Truth, but we don't even know what year she might have been born.
Correct.
It's kind of an accident. Harriet Tubman, same deal. I had the same issue. Actually, this gives me, if you don't mind, just a quick little interlude. This gives me a chance to correct something. Not long before you came on the show, I did this episode where I just went through my slideshow showing the Venus intervals of every single woman who served as a first lady of the United States, most of them being wives of the president, and then occasionally like a niece or a sister, when the wife was deceased or incapacitated. And it was pointed out that, after the fact, after I was done, someone said, oh, you didn't talk about Sally Hemings. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. And why did you exclude Sally Hemings, Nick? What's behind that? I don't know even what year she was born.
We don't have
She
any data.
Now technically she had never been first lady of the United States, which I was talking about, but I would have thrown her in there, so to speak. Excuse the way I've phrased that, but I would have included her in this slideshow, but I just don't know. And it's the same thing. Like we happen with Frederick Douglass, we happen to have that. First of all, he always kind of suspected he was born in February of 1818. And then much later in his life, he found a document that at least confirmed the month. And so we have that. And ditto for Booker T. Washington. Like it's a bit sort of vague, but we're pretty sure he was born in 1856. We at least narrow it down to a year. But this is an issue actually that I face all the time in my studies. When you're talking about the 19th century, I'd like to be studying Shaka Zulu. I'd like to be studying, Red Cloud, and there's all kinds of people, really important people of that age, whose horoscopes I'll never be able to look at, and that's just par for the course. And I think, we would be talking about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth's
Truth.
horoscopes if we had any inkling what they are. Anyway, I'm sorry. Please continue.
No, don't be sorry. In fact, it's a good tangent, and I want to bring this to our listeners and viewers. So we have a colleague. His name is Demetrius Bagley,
Mm.
and a few years ago, he was trying to launch a project called Starshine, where he was trying to do more data collection. It was even crowdfunded data collection of famous or notable African Americans. And I supported this, and also promoted it for him. And I don't know where he is with it. I don't know if it's been tabled or whatever. But this is a big issue I suspect, not just in the African American community, but many marginalized communities where we don't necessarily get the birth times and information for, our notables,
Sometimes
um,
not even birthdays.
or birthdays.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm bringing this to everyone's attention because the more people involved in this, the more that we can figure out things. So, for instance, we have Taylor Swift's information, I believe, right? I think I've looked at her chart once or twice. We still don't know Beyonce's rising sign.
Yeah, we argue about it a lot, though. It comes up
Right.
on Twitter.
It comes up on Twitter, and someone was bold enough at one of her concerts to say, actually put in front of her Scorpio rising or Libra rising, right?
Right.
And we didn't get an answer. But it was a valiant attempt. But we don't even have her information. Now,
Yeah.
the Astro Twins supposedly got,
Yeah.
did a reading for her, but then they lost it. So
Yeah, I
anyway,
remember at
go
the
on.
time, though, that was, I mean, it is feasible. I remember at the time that they were sort of speaking to celebrities and stuff. So I do believe the anecdote, but it's still, we don't
Oh
have
yeah,
proof.
yeah.
So there's
No,
no
I've
point,
talked to
yeah, but I believing the anecdote still is not proof.
right.
Just for the record, Taylor Swift, I had to double check. Taylor Swift's data is DD. This is
Oh,
another issue. This is another issue that, Astro Data Bank has gone through a bit of a quality control issue lately. The editor who runs AstroTheme, a website that notoriously and regularly publishes faulty birth data just to get clicks, because there's the Astro Data Bank website has no ads. It's just there as a service to the community. AstroTheme has ads, and so the more pages he has, the more clicks he gets. And so if he presents these phony birth times, he still gets the clicks. But as a result, a lot of these unfounded, made up birth times have found their way into various databases. And Taylor Swift is a classic example. There's way too many clicks to not just put up an imaginary page for her.
well,
That's the thing. Astro Data. I'm sorry, Sam. Astro Data Bank was meant to sort of overcome that, and the fact that it's not reliant on.
well,
clicks.
it's still doing good job because
Oh yeah, yeah.
Astro Theme actually pirates information from
Yes.
Databank, and then they also pirated the system, so they have a rotten system now. I mean, and they call it that. I mean, they use the same markers, AA or DD. So they kind of taken it from Astro Data Bank.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought we had a clean birth time for her. That's apparently
No.
My fault.
No. Look, when I think, the main thing is, and I don't want to, I don't want to be that guy who comes around and says it's, it's not a race thing. But to my experience, it's a rural versus urban thing. Okay. We have birth certificates for John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk because they happen to be born in towns large enough to have a hospital that registered their births. We don't know Dizzy Gillespie's birth because he was literally born in a shack, in a rural shack. And it just happened, it's not like Coltrane and Monk are more worthy than Gillespie. They came from different backgrounds. And if you were born in a city, or at least a town that had, brick and mortar establishments and what have you, you had more chance of being born in a hospital and therefore it being documented.
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that. I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
But as someone who also, and I'm not bragging, it may sound like that, but I'm not trying to brag. I
You
do
can
have
brag.
some. Okay, I do have some famous clients,
Okay.
and what I've learned from famous Black American or African American clients, what I've learned from them. Now I'll give you an example. He is not a client. Let me say that again in my best German. He is not a client.
Okay.
So, but I did get from one of my clients the birth information of Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Hmm.
Okay. So I got his birth information, literally his time. I asked her, I mean, my client, I asked her to ask him, would it be possible for me to share that information? Like thinking about, oh, that would be a good contribution to Astro Data Bank. He said no. Now, what was fascinating to me is that he's an atheist. He doesn't
Hmm.
believe in astrology. He doesn't give any credence to astrology, right?
Sure.
But there is this thing in the African American community still where they don't want to take any chances related to it. Like I have a couple other clients, I asked them this information. They're like, can we share it? Nope. And then some of them, a few of them, they have wrong information up on
Yeah.
purpose.
Sure.
So it's 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 an odd thing. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
belittling any of these people who make the choices for their life. But I think some of what you're saying is definitely true for the 20th century, early 20th or late 19th century,
Hmm.
even maybe even somewhat today. Even though I think most hospitals, even regional hospitals, in birthing rooms, they do have to have a clock, and that clock has to be accurate. But it's not always recorded. It's not always put on the birth certificate.
Sure.
Um, so that's it. That's the other thing that we run into too.
Yeah.
So
I know, like, my passion of passions is really old blues music. I listen to a lot of records that are made in the 20s and 30s, being serenaded by ghosts, people who've been dead for half a century or more. And in some and these, are really, really interesting musicians with incredible lives that would just be so fascinating to track astrologically. But the birth dates, because they're all like to a man, from some, born in some sharecropper's field or something like that. There's if you have the birth month that they're born, you've really struck gold. And virtually all of them, their actual birthdays are something of a mystery or contested. And once in a while, you have one that, like, from birth to death, they use the same birthday over the course of their whole life. So it's a great frustration.
so I guess
but
that
but
was our
again,
way
but
of
again, but I think it's, to my mind, it's because of the rural circumstances of their birth.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a long apologia, ladies, on
Yes. Sorry. We that was quite a detour.
but
That's my fault.
yeah. No, 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 no. I mean, you don't have to apologize. I do need to do something right quick. What's your time check? What's the time check? What time do you have?
We're 11:30. So yeah, you've got
Okay.
whatever 20 minutes
Okay.
or something.
I got 20 minutes or so. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I was just gonna say, this is not just, two guys being guys going like, well,
No.
women weren't involved, black women weren't involved. We're not saying the same thing as John Wimmer. You know,
No,
women
no,
weren't
no.
involved in the struggle. We definitively know. Now I could and I would include Angela Davis
Hmm.
um as another seminal person whose birth information we do have, because I know she's a Taurus rising. Um, so we do have her birth information. I don't know if I think it's either it's not DD, I don't believe, but that is an issue. I mean, we have the human ephemeris checking. Um, but let me just say
No,
something about
she's
Malcolm.
a 12:30
Yeah,
p.m. in
yep.
Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah, yeah. No, no.
And she's a Taurus rising.
Um. Yep. 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 Yeah.
Taurus
Aquarius, Sun
rising.
and Moon, Taurus rising. Yep. Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, we definitely could include her. But speaking of Taurians, here we have Malcolm X, and again, I've talked about this axis between Scorpio and whatever, and I have come to believe this time is accurate. And I can tell you one simple reason, and even introduce briefly a very interesting technique called solar arc directions.
Mm.
So I was teaching this chart to a student just as I was getting ready for a lecture at Norwalk. This is in 2022. Um, and I was going to be talking about solar arc directions. And So one of the things she kind of brought up was the anaretic degree of his moon, which means the final degree of the moon and his midheaven. And I have read a few biographies on Malcolm, and of course, there are people who know almost all different elements of his life, but I didn't know the first year of his life. So when I saw this, I was like, what happened in the first year of Malcolm's life? Because how solar arc directions work is that we advance based on the average. We could say the average, but it's literally a little more complicated than that. The average motion of the sun moving about 1 degree every year of life. And so every planet is advanced 1 degree. So if this birth time were accurate and his midheaven was at 29 degrees, 42 minutes, and moon was there, something should have happened in his first year of life that would be significant for him. And indeed, it did. He moved. They moved from Omaha, Nebraska.
Right.
And
to Michigan, no?
yeah, to Michigan. So
Lansing, I
and
think.
yep. And Michigan became like where he established himself, not as Malcolm X, but established himself as like, I mean, it was his formative years in Flint and then Detroit when he became Detroit Red, and then going to Boston with his sister, and then ending up in prison. Um, and then he eventually became Malcolm X. But this was just another. This is actually, solar arc directions can be a good way to kind of rectify. Later, you're going to see Patrick Watson on Nick's show, and one of the ways that Patrick rectifies is using zodiacal releasing. Because I send my clients to Patrick as well too, like
right.
for rectification.
Unfortunately, yesterday's episode was about how Patrick's rectification of Elon Musk had not.
I heard.
Yeah.
I heard that.
But I mean, everyone agreed. Like we could see the reasoning he had applied. But it's a good reminder. Rectification is always a theoretical exercise.
Absolutely. And I mean, I still stand by Patrick's work because I mean, not only have clients come back and talked about like how it fits in that chart, and it's an interesting thing. I mean, I don't want to go into the weeds with that because rectification, as you said, is theoretical, but it also brings up a theoretical set of questions because you can sometimes have the right chart with what seems to be the right time, but that right chart still works. That's a mystery.
Yeah.
All right. So this is also Dr. King. And what's fascinating about these two men, just take a note of this. This is, I mean, I know you've looked at this, Nick, but so we have a sun in Taurus with a Capricorn rising, with this chart being, moon in Aries. But we have a sun in Capricorn with a Taurus rising. And what's fascinating about this, not just in terms of that, the destiny of African Americans, as we talked about Venus and Mars, Taurus and Scorpio, if you go back to that first Africans chart, but if you've ever seen Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing,
oh yeah,
there's one particular character who situates this dynamic that has come into our popular consciousness, which is Malcolm Martin, right?
right.
And there is this between love, quote unquote, love and hate. Although I do not think of either man as a lover or a hater, I think they're both lovers in different ways. But it's almost, I've seen this dynamic. I probably should do a paper on this, on twins, twin souls. I don't mean this literally in the way that we understand twin souls or twin flames, but people who we can even say this about Booker T and W.E.B. Du Bois, or Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois, but where we have two people who offer like a dynamic that seem in conflict, whether we're talking about Biggie and Tupac, or whether we're talking about Prince and Michael Jackson, who both had Pisces moons.
Yeah.
Right. There's this dynamic that happens between them that creates choice. And yeah, sorry, you're going to say something.
I was just going to say, just this past week, Buthelezi, the king of the Zulus, died. And he really was that to Nelson Mandela. If you know about the anti-apartheid struggle, Sure, there was, Africans against whites, but there was also this split between the Zulu kingdom and other factions of African independence. And while Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years, Buthelezi, while speaking out against apartheid, was still, he twice visited Reagan at the White House. Let's just put it that way. He was a little more involved in dialogue than Mandela. But yeah, you had sort of the separatist faction. So even in that, you would think like the most unified that part of the world ever got. But yeah, there was a very tense dynamic between the ANC and the Zulu, and sometimes collaborators in fighting against apartheid, but often sort of rivals as well, and sometimes with bloody results. So yeah, it's something that happens in these struggles. That you're not just going to get one pole. You'll get two generals with different views of what the strategy should be.
Right. Exactly. And for those who are wondering, because you see a noon chart, this is I don't think it's AA, but it's maybe
I think it's A, if I remember
it's
correctly.
A.
Let me see
Yeah.
here. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
A.
It's A.
High noon
So
stated by his mom.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. So don't think that this is just rectified or
Yeah.
anything.
Some people are
Now,
born at noon.
now we do not have a birth time, and I'll remember your going forward, Nick, your advice. So we don't have a birth time for Fannie Lou Hamer, October 6, 1917. But I did allude to her in terms of Black August. And I grew up hearing about Fannie Lou Hamer, even though I was a kid and didn't quite understand or grasp it until I was much later. But we have this, Libra, Sun in Libra, um, widely squared to this Pluto, Moon in Gemini. She doesn't have anything along the axis except Venus, which is her ruler of Scorpio, Taurus. But she does have a lot in Leo. Now, one thing that's interesting, why she comes to my mind, is that she actually, I don't know what Venus cycle this or part of the Venus cycle this was, but when
It's what I call the Black Five. I'll tell you about that in a moment, but please
okay,
continue.
and when she actually did, protest at the DNC, and what was that, 1968?
No, 64.
64. Thank you.
During the Venus retrograde in Gemini, so you can see that the Cancer to Gemini Venus retrograde in that summer. Yeah.
In 1964, right? I mean, it was pretty much near the time that we also had not the, well, the anniversary of Nat Turner's rebellion. Um, and so there is this consciousness that she brings to the fore about recognizing the key elements of the black struggle, and especially those who were agricultural, which is something that she advanced. Because she was born in Winona, Mississippi. You want to talk about rural?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Winona is very rural. So that's kind of one thing where I felt like I had to have her. But yeah, tell us about the Black Five.
Yeah, the Black Five interval, you get a lot of sort of amazing intellectual and revolutionary minds in the Black Five. It's kind of a creative one, and that particular one in 1917. Remember, she's born within a month of the Bolshevik Revolution, and I just want to tell you, she's born October 6, 1917. Thelonious Monk's born October 10th. Dizzy Gillespie's born October 21st. And I thought Art Tatum was also born around here, but maybe I have the wrong year for him. But this is like this. Marcia Hunt is born October 17th, and then Oliver Tambo's born October 27th. Just in that 1 month of 1917, you get these powerhouses both in the United States and in Africa of militant activists. And even later in November of 1917, Helen Suzman, one of the few sort of an important white ally in the fight against apartheid, and Indira Gandhi, people like that. Ossie Davis, December of 1917. So, it's just there's something about that period, that autumn of 1917, and generally speaking, that Black Five interval brings up a lot of very interesting iconoclasts, everyone, not just Indira Gandhi, but also Mahatma Gandhi, Lenny Bruce. I mean, I could go on and on. It's like, it's one of those chapters I'm going to write about, but it didn't surprise me when I saw that she was a Black 5 interval, because yeah, there's just everyone born around that time seems to be really special,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And then we have Barack Hussein Obama.
I've heard of him.
Yep, I think I've heard of him too. I mean, his midheaven is along that axis I just mentioned. I mean, and then also, I think his sun connects to the Venus and Leo for the first Africans. And I mean, I always get a little emotional thinking about that November 4th, that evening.
The re-election.
No, well, oops.
We're looking at 2012. The first
didn't-
election's 2008.
I put in the wrong date.
Yep.
Forgive me.
Elections don't
Yeah.
happen on a Sunday. Sorry. Sorry to have a Canadian explain your country to you.
Why did I do that? No, okay. Anyway, but irrespective of this chart being the wrong chart completely, I mean, I have looked at that 2008, and I could probably get that up. That day, just looking at his chart, and now his chart is not wrong, so we do know he was born at 7:24 p.m.
Yeah, there was something of a concerted effort to get his birth certificate.
It was fascinating. I mean, not just from astrologers. I mean, we did have one astrologer who purported to have his chart in advance than everybody else. How far was? But she was only off by minutes, right?
Were they? I thought they were. I don't remember them being correct.
I think
who was it? God, this is 15 years ago.
it's Joni.
Okay.
Joni.
Okay. Over the years of already in this conversation, we've talked about a bunch of stuff that was once front and center in my mind that I couldn't stop thinking about, and I'd totally forgotten about that. You've reminded me of. Here, I'm gonna take your screenshot down and put up the correct chart, just so we're talking about.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So, and I'll take that down. I mean, if you're gonna.
No, you can keep it up if you have another chart. We don't have much time, but please.
We don't have much time. Yeah. But yeah. Joni Patry. When she did it for the UAC in Denver.
Okay.
I remember. I wasn't there. Were you there?
I was there. I was there.
Okay.
I've forgotten. Yeah, I mean that was a big deal because that was in May of 2008. So he was clearly like on the rise, but I don't think he'd even just been specifically voted the candidate yet. I think that the convention was coming up and he would be, and it looked likely that he would be.
Right. So here we have the moon conjoined to his Jupiter, his natal Jupiter. It does tap into the north node. The south node is conjoined to his sun, but it's also, remember, his sun is pretty close to that first African's Venus.
Mm.
So I think that's also another significant thing. And I have to say, when I said I always get a little emotional. I thought, in my naivete, and maybe this is true for most of us, in my naivete, I thought America had changed.
Mm. It relieves me to know that I'm not the only one.
No, yeah.
I mean, I can remember, being a young Canadian in the 80s, and certainly being under the impression that, oh yeah, racism, that was that thing that was like this problem in the 60s and it got solved. I mean, that's like 13-year-old me who knew sweet F all about the world. But it occasionally, and the Obama election is one of those moments where for a split second you allow yourself to believe that, because you've just seen the needle move a little bit, and then only later to realize, like, what am I thinking? We're living in the same world. It's the same. We're facing the same stuff that we were facing in 1963. in 1954, you know, in 1917. Really, you know, fundamentally, we've barely, well, we may have shaken, you know, the box, but I don't think we've really moved it.
Well, I think this comes in fits and starts, and this is something important, especially talk about that Mars Pluto opposition. You know, speaking of fits and starts, Wh- so I have long believed, and I think many would agree, that the ascendancy of Donald Trump is a knee jerk
Oh yeah,
reaction to Barack Hussein Obama,
yeah,
and literally what's fascinating to watch, even you can look at this empirically. This is not just me being, like an angry black man talking about it. I mean, you could look at it empirically that Trump's presidency was pretty much not just a mandate related to Obama. He really tried to copy almost, page for page, some elements of Obama's ascendancy. A couple examples. I think I remember them saying he had the same cake, or kind of the same kind of cake for his inauguration. Um,
I,
which
okay,
was I was like, dude, really? And the other, I mean, there are probably a lot more, but the other standout for me that I will never forget, Melania for his reelection in 2016. Melania Trump literally cribbed from Michelle Obama's
right,
speech.
yeah,
I mean, almost word for word, which I'm still gobsmacked by. Like, you have no friends, no one told you that this was a bad idea, that you shouldn't do this, or like you just. I mean, I don't even think she wrote it, right? I mean, I don't think she's okay.
oh,
I
I'm
hope I'm
sure.
saying
I don't think that I would have a hard time believing that was Melania
okay,
Trump's choice. I think like
right.
there's some handler thought it was, and she just read
And
what.
that's what's amazing to me. That I'm like, well, do they just think like, there's so many different thoughts that people have related to the Obamas. Just the sheer amount of racism that they were
Yeah,
exposed to, the sexism, the transphobia, they were exposed to.
it's
So
still going. It's like louder
it
than
hasn't
ever. This
it
whole
hasn't
Michelle
stopped.
Obama thing is louder now. You know, I mean, good grief, she hasn't been first lady in 7 years. You know, like, like
Right. And there's still
and it's like louder than ever. Um, and I don't even, you know, even if it were true, like, so what, you know? But not that I think for a second it is. You know, in the recent interview that Carson had, Tucker Carlson rather, with that guy with some rather extraordinary little anecdotes about Barack. I know we're pretty much out of time, Sam, but
we're out of time. Well,
I
yeah, I just
never
want to
I never
yeah,
get
go on.
enough talking to you, so I want you to know you're welcome back.
Okay, I'll just mention these two charts, and then pretty much I'll be done with this part of the show.
Okay, I'm sorry I
Um,
keep interrupting.
no, it's okay. I do want to mention, and I did see B. Evans, and yeah, I will add Shirley Chisholm.
Hmm.
Um, there's someone else, Barbara Lee. Um, but yeah, but Shirley Chisholm for sure because I lived in her district,
Yeah.
in Brooklyn. But what I'll say is I do want to mention Ryan Coogler, which we do have his chart for. I think it's AA because it means very specific 543. You're like, well, why are you talking about Black Panther? Using this related to Black history. Well, there's a couple things. One is it's going toward the conjunction, in terms of its time. Its ascendant conjunction to the first Africans chart.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a very interesting chart in of itself. But what's significant about Black Panther, the movie, just to be clear, because
Yes.
they can be confusing, like Ngawa, Black Power. That's not where I am. But with that, but with Black Panther, it was a worldwide phenomenon. It was the first time that a film prominently featuring Black people made as much money around the world as it did.
Hmm.
And one indication of that is that it was the first film that Saudi Arabia had shown in Saudi Arabia in decades. It was the only film or initial film that the king would sanction as allowing to be seen.
I can tell you, I watched that movie in a theater in Cape Town, South Africa, and I can tell you it was a hit. It was a hit, sir.
Yeah.
You and I being who we are, I know I grew up reading Marvel comics, including Black Panther. Um, and so while I'm something of a cinephile and I understand like all these film lovers hating on Marvel for sort of taking over the whole industry, the 9-year-old in me just loves this stuff, especially when it works really well, like the Black Panther movie did. Look, I know you have to run. I want to keep you forever.
Yeah.
There's more to talk about. So I don't want this to just cut off. I didn't want us to rush we had the technical issues and all that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to rush through the whole slideshow. So like, if you'd like to come back, I'd really love to have you back.
Well,
And
yeah, I only had a few more slides, and I mean, I think people have the heft of what I was trying to say, in terms of looking at this destiny. I mean, I guess I could come back and say, like, well, what is the destiny? I think so.
I think we should talk some more. That's what I
Okay.
would like to have you back.
Okay.
Unless you're resistant to it. Like
No,
if you're
I'm
like, I've
not.
had enough of you, Nick. You interrupt me too much. Screw you. Then I get it. But
No. I always take your interruptions as enthusiasm,
okay,
which,
all right. I hope so.
yeah. Although one of the first things I commented when I was just all black for literally, the black screen.
Black screen. Let's just be.
Right. When I was a black screen, is it so you're gonna grow your beard out? You're gonna have this power beard?
I don't know. I'm being very. The beard was never a plan, and it just kind of happened. I'm kind, I joke to Anna that the reason I grew the beard is because it makes me look like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and like some kind of wise old astrologer, as opposed to like when I shave my face and I'm like this, man child. Yeah, I felt it gave me some kind of gravitas as a wizard, as an astrologer.
Well,
But I mean, that's that I came up with the excuse after the beard existed. It wasn't really the motivator. Yeah, it was just like, okay, let's try this for a little while.
okay. No, I was just curious.
Let's shave other parts of the head instead of the face, and that kind of thing.
No, I understand. I mean, for me, I don't know how it is for you. I mean, sometimes growing a beard, I don't know if ladies know this. I don't know if this is true for you, but for me, sometimes when I get a beard, it's too painful to. I mean, it's not painful to cut it, but it's a lot of work for it to grow in. Like, and then I don't know if sometimes it's painful for me. A lot of black men have trouble with their skin that way, so I just let it be.
Right.
So.
Well, there's that, but also, in my opinion, black men can pull off mustaches a lot better than white men. I don't know why, but it always looks wrong on a white guy, and it looks just fine. And call me whatever name you want. This is just like an aesthetic kind of like, yeah, that mustache is dope. Whereas if I did that, I don't know. I
don't know. I think you still look good.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, I do have to run.
I'll let you
get
go.
to another appointment.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
If not next week, the week after, whatever works for you. I'm doing this live stream every Monday, but I'd love to have you back. I love talking astrology with you, and no matter how long we talk, it never seems like enough time. So, go forth, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Same here. All right.
All right. Cheers, Sam.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for
all right. I'm going to say goodbye to the crowd after I'll let you go. You go ahead and sign off, and I'll just, there you go. Sam's gone. Okay. Well, thank you folks for tuning in for that. I'm going to quickly check on the comments, see if there was anything. Trump stole Reagan's tag. Yeah. Just dropped the word let's. Okay. All right, cool. Hopefully you folks enjoyed that. I love having Sam on, and he's just someone it's like having Patrick. That's the whole idea of this live stream. It just gives me a chance to talk to my friends, and you can witness the conversation that I have with my friends, which most of the time is really interesting, except for the times that I go ahead and ruin it. But anyway, thank you for tuning in. For those of you who've stuck around despite my Mercury retrograde technical snafus, I really, appreciate your loyalty and sticking around for that. And yeah, Sam will be back at some point next week or the week after or something like that. And I've got some other things that I want to do in future solo live streams as well. Kind of get back into some things that I've started and haven't, have more to say on and things like that. So yeah, please do tune in every Monday. When I do the solo live stream, I do it an hour later at 11. When Sam, because his schedule is different, we do it an hour earlier. But either way, I always make an announcement before an hour or so before we go live. So yeah, next Sunday I'll be doing the team stream with Patrick, and then next Monday either a solo live stream or another team stream with Sam. And so please stay tuned. Thank you again all for paying attention and participating. My name is Nick Dagan Best. My website URL is nickdaganbestastrologer.com. So if you want to reach me for any reason, go ahead and contact me there, and have yourselves a fantastic week. Ciao. Yeah, I'll talk.